Today, Donald Trump's long-threatened tariffs against China went into effect. Washington imposed tariffs on $34 billion worth of imported Chinese goods. And Beijing quickly retaliated with $34 billion in tariffs on imported U.S. goods like soybeans, pork, seafood, cars, and whiskey. China's Commerce Ministry accused the Trump administration of igniting the biggest trade war in economic history. In response to what he has said are years of unfair trade policies, the president had already imposed tariffs on imports from Europe, Canada, and Mexico, which responded in kind, as well as Japan. And he's threatening an additional $500 billion in tariffs on Chinese imports. Fallout from this growing trade war is expected to hit Trump's base the hardest. The retaliatory tariffs target products that are mostly produced in the states that voted for Donald Trump. Joining me now to explain it all is one of the all-time veterans of the world of financial journalism, CNBC contributor Ron Insana. Ron, are we in a trade war, and how big is it?
We are in a trade war. It is not yet the biggest in history. This is not the trade war to end all trade wars yet, Steve. In fact, you'd have to go back to the 1930s to see that, where we had intense protectionism, the so-called Smoot-Hawley tariffs that were passed then that deepened the Great Depression and led to competitive currency devaluations, what they called beggar thy neighbor policies that really made things much worse. We're at the beginning of a trade war. If the president were to impose that $500 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese goods, that's everything that China sends us. That would be the trade war to end all trade wars. That would really rattle not only world markets, but the economy.
Because that was my other question. Looking at the stock market today, it seemed like I think it went up. It ended the day up, right? So Wall Street not yet responding like this is a panic situation?
Well, certainly not panic. And Wall Street's been going sideways since January, really, since we've topped out. We haven't made a new all-time high in the Dow or the S&P for quite some time. The NASDAQ, being strong in technology, has been doing well. And the Russell 2000, a small cap average that is focused on domestic companies that would not be affected by trade wars, has gone to a succession of new highs. So we see the market differentiating. Industrial stocks have taken a hit. So in a certain sense, parts of the market are reflecting this emerging trade war, but the overall market hasn't really collapsed. It has in China, however. Chinese stocks are down about 23% from their most recent high.
Is there anything to the theory Trump talks about being the negotiator, about leverage, about the idea of you start to go down this road, you rattle China, and then they get nervous, and then you're able to have some leverage to recenter the relationship somehow?
Well, there may be, except that China likes to play a long game. When they're thinking about China 2025 or China 2050, we're thinking about USA tomorrow. And so to the extent that you have a leader there who is leader for life, and you have a president who's a temporary occupant of the White House, there are different strategies at work here. Now, the Chinese could take the hit for a longer period of time, potentially in the United States, if they choose to do so. Right now, their economy is faltering a bit, so they may get hit a little bit harder. But also getting hit are U.S. companies that export, that re-import parts from other places that they manufacture in China, then bring things home that are now being hit with tariffs. There are companies in the United States that are feeling the effect of higher prices, higher input costs, and retaliatory tariffs. So everybody has something to lose. Trade wars are not win-win. They're not even zero-sum games. They're lose-lose, generally speaking.
Well, so the next step, when you say it would elevate it to a situation on par with something we saw back in the 30s in terms of the scale of it, is there a sense when the administration would make that decision, if it makes that decision?
No, I don't think yet. I mean, it's moving reasonably quickly as it is. I mean, the Commerce Department determined that the U.S. was harmed economically to the tune of about $50 billion. It's imposed $34 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese goods. When you start going above that level of economic harm, then you have to wonder how China will retaliate, how hard they'll go. Will they drive down the value of the currency, their own currency, which would make their exports cheaper and offset the impact of the tariffs? They've already now reduced tariffs on goods that are being imported from places like Vietnam and other Asian nations. They've stopped buying U.S. soybeans. So this could escalate very quickly. It could get out of control. And if that were to happen, you could see a global recession, because outside of the United States, Europe is weakening economically. China is. Japan's kind of moribund. And so it could get nasty quickly. The markets are focused more on short-term realities. The economy here is good. Profits look decent in the second quarter. We'll start hearing about those next week. But in the longer run, when you look out, if this thing were to spin out of control, it would be a serious, serious problem for the global and the domestic economies.
You mentioned Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act going way back, but is there an example of a modern president who's done something on a smaller scale?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Ronald Reagan did this with the Japanese. If you recall, 1986 or so, we were losing manufacturing jobs to Japan, and there was great consternation in Washington. At one point, a group of congressmen smashed a Toshiba television set on the steps of the Capitol. And so we had some arguments with both Japan and Germany during that period, but they were ultimately amicably resolved and resulted in a strengthening of organizations like the World Trade Organization, whereas the Trump administration wants to break away from those multilateral agreements that govern international trade. If that also were to happen, if NAFTA were to break down, we were to pull out of the WTO, as the president may have suggested at one point along the way, at least according to some reports, then again, you'd see a fraying of the global trading system, and that could lead to a weakening of the global economy.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.